Twin Peaks Bridge Reflection. 1. Trump desperate for Nobel Prize. Donald Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. Yes. The same man who threatened to make Canada the 51st state, tried to buy Greenland, declared he would retake the Panama Canal, and brags about tariffs like baseball cards, now wants to be remembered as a global peacemaker. I'm a 200% never Trumper. I think he's reckless, narcissistic, and dangerous. But here's the twist. If Trump actually prevents a war with China over Taiwan, a war that could ignite World War III, then maybe, just maybe, he does deserve the Nobel Prize. And the latest moves from his administration are casting a little light over what The Economist once called the most dangerous place on earth, Taiwan. 2. Trump's peace track record. Trump loves to claim he's already made peace in 7 conflicts. But let's check the records. He boasted about playing peacemaker between India and Pakistan. In reality, he only offended New Delhi with his bully tactics, and damaged the US-India partnership that took decades, under both parties, to build. He did sign the Abraham Accords in the Middle East, probably the only legitimate achievement on his list, but even that simply formalized a trend that was already happening. He staged reality TV summits with North Korea. The love letters with Kim Jong-un made headlines, but the nukes never went away. And then came the Alaska summit on Ukraine. Trump thought he could charm Putin into peace. Instead, it collapsed, and America looked humiliated. This is not exactly Nobel material. And yet, here's the irony. If Trump's chaotic retreat from global commitments ends up restraining Taiwan independence, if it keeps the US and China from stumbling into World War III, then history might actually write Nobel Trump with a straight face. And now, more and more evidence shows his administration is embarking on a real strategic shift in US military posture, one that could actually give peace a chance in the Taiwan Strait. 3. Busy viewer summary. Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm a 200% never Trumper. I think he's reckless. But if he prevents a US-China war over Taiwan, then by my book, he might actually deserve it. Here's why that's suddenly plausible. The Pentagon's new retrenchment posture pulls back to the second island chain. Fewer US targets near China, greater survivability at Guam and the Marianas, hardened air and missile defenses, and massive R&D into hypersonics, 6th-gen fighters, and autonomous systems. Together, these moves signal a clear defensive posture and reduce tensions with Beijing. Most crucial, it also cools the Taiwan Strait, what The Economist once called the most dangerous place on earth. Bottom line. Whether by design or by accident, Trump's retrenchment lowers the risk of war. If it keeps the peace in the Taiwan Strait, that's a Nobel-level outcome. Before we dive in, if you appreciate calm, clear breakdowns of big global plays, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your take. 4. Pentagon's quiet retreat. The leak. On September 5, 2025, Politico reported on a leaked Pentagon draft of the new National Defense Strategy. The headline was blunt. Pentagon plan prioritizes homeland over China threat. Instead of putting China at the center of US defense, the document puts the American homeland in the Western Hemisphere first. That shift has global reach. In Asia, it means pulling back from the first island chain, places like Okinawa and the Philippines, and relying more on the second island chain around Guam and the Marianas. And why this retreat now? Money. America is running record deficits and has $37 trillion federal debt on book in 2025, nearly $1 trillion a year in interest payments alone. The Pentagon knows it can't afford to garrison the world like it did in the 20th century. Missiles. China's September 3 parade showed off a new generation of hypersonic and long-range strike systems. Parking US forces inside the first island chain isn't just expensive, it's suicidal. They'd be targets on day one of a war. Overstretch. The US is already neck-deep in Ukraine, still burning resources to contain Russia. At the same time, it's entangled in the Gaza conflict and rising tensions with Iran. Washington has learned the hard way. It cannot fight 2 wars at once, let alone 3. So the logic is clear. Pull back, survive, and deter from a distance. And this matters most for Taiwan. The leaked strategy notes Taiwan has assumed US support is guaranteed, but that assumption is now costly and dangerous. If Taipei realizes Washington is stepping back, the incentive to rush toward independence fades. And if independence cools, so does the most dangerous spark for World War III. 5. The strategy behind the retreat. From leak to blueprint. Here's the key point. This strategy isn't coming out of thin air. Back in July 2025, former Trump official Dan Caldwell and RAND scholar Jennifer Kavanaugh spelled it out in Defense Priorities. Their article, Aligning Global Military Posture with U.S. Interests, is basically the blueprint for the Pentagon's leaked plan. Why pull back? They argued America's current posture in Asia is too offensively oriented and located too close to China's borders, in places where U.S. personnel and assets are unlikely to survive in the event of a conflict, and where they are more likely to provoke escalation than deter Chinese aggression. In plain English, stationing U.S. forces right off China's coast isn't deterrence. It's provocation, and a death trap. Beijing just underscored that point. On September 3, during its massive Victory Day parade, China rolled out rows of new long-range, supersonic, and hypersonic missiles, weapons purpose-built to wipe out U.S. bases inside the first island chain. Keeping American forces there isn't strategy anymore. It's suicide. The balance is already shifting. Poking China in the eye from the first island chain is a losing game. The Taiwan problem. Caldwell and Kavanaugh also warned, Taiwan, though not an official U.S. ally, has come to assume that support from the United States is more or less assured. This arrangement is both costly for the United States, especially as China's power grows, and risks pulling it into a war that does not advance its core interests. In other words, Taiwan's overconfidence could drag America into a war it doesn't need, and might not win. That's Washington's nightmare. A tiny island making choices that pull the US into World War III. The most important line. So let's be crystal clear. This is the single most important point for you, the viewer, to remember. A balancing approach does not require a direct US military defense of Taiwan, as the tiny island would not dramatically shift the balance of power. Let that sink in. For decades, American leaders have spoken in code, hiding behind strategic ambiguity. Now it's written in black and white. Defending Taiwan is not vital to America's survival. The alternative path. So what's the alternative? Caldwell and Kavanaugh call it balance, not dominance, a playbook that looks a lot like the Ukraine solution. Push allies like Japan and the Philippines to take more responsibility. Operate from the second island chain with long-range bombers, submarines, and standoff weapons. Harden bases and airfields for survivability instead of clinging to fragile forward outposts. This isn't about preparing to win World War III. It's about designing U.S. posture to avoid World War III altogether. 6. This strategy is already underway. Europe allies shoulder more. The U.S. is already putting this strategy into practice. As the Washington Post and Reuters reported, in Eastern Europe the White House moved to slash Section 333 in the Baltic Security Initiative. Cuts worth roughly $1.6 billion in training, arms, and intelligence for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The message is blunt. Europe must take on the burden itself. Ukraine burden sharing. Nowhere is that clearer than in Ukraine. Since Russia's invasion, the U.S., the #1 supporter, has already poured $134 billion into Ukraine's defense. But the tide is shifting. EU institutions and member states have committed more than $120 billion in total. Today, Washington is deliberately stepping back. Europe is now expected to carry far more of the load. Marines moving to Guam. The same pattern is visible in Asia. Marine Corps Times, December 16, 2024, reported that the U.S. has begun relocating as many as 9,000 Marines from Okinawa to Guam, shifting from the vulnerable first island chain to the deeper, more defensible second island chain. Hardened Guam defense. According to Defense News, August 1, 2025, Guam itself is being hardened into a fortress. The Pentagon has committed nearly $8 billion to missile defense, including the LTAMDS radar, expanded Patriot batteries, and a new command and control network. Long-term tech investments. At the same time, Washington is betting on the future. Breaking Defense, June 2025, wrote that the 2026 defense budget earmarks $160 billion for research and testing, with priorities including hypersonic missiles, sixth-generation fighter jets, and autonomous drones. Weapons meant for long-term competition with China, not short-term dominance on its doorstep. 7. Cooling Taiwan independence. There is little doubt this retrenchment will continue for at least 3 more years under the current Trump administration. If Washington keeps pulling back to the second island chain and stops signaling automatic intervention, 2 very important things are likely to happen. 1. Beijing's anxiety about U.S. military pressure will drop, and 2. Taipei's independence movement, the real driver of the current dangerous situation in the Taiwan Strait, will cool down. What the polls already show. A 2003 Duke University NCCU survey by Emerson Niu shows that Taiwanese independence sentiment is decisively dependent on the chance of war with the People's Republic if China. And that, in turn, indirectly depends on the assurance of direct U.S. military involvement, because with a U.S. security guarantee, the People's Liberation Army would be reluctant to attack Taiwan. So it is no surprise that the Duke study found 72% of Taiwanese supported independence if there was no war, but only 27% supported independence if it meant war. That means nearly half of Taiwanese, 46.2%, are conditional supporters, backing independence only under favorable conditions. Why this matters today. This old survey still tells us everything about today's politics. Independence support is fragile and conditional. If the U.S. Navy signals it will not fight for Taiwan, as Trump's pullback to the second island chain suggests, then Taiwanese know independence equals war. And when independence equals war, public support collapses. Cooling, the most dangerous place on Earth. This is why the new U.S. posture will dramatically lower the risk of war. Fewer U.S. forces on China's doorstep equals fewer sparks for crisis. Less guaranteed backing equals cooler independence momentum in Taipei. That's how you reduce what The Economist once called the most dangerous place on Earth. 8. Maybe Nobel. From a never-Trumper. Let me be clear. I am never-Trumper. Not 100%, but 200%. His chaos has damaged America's fragile democracy and weakened the checks and balances that protect us from authoritarian power. On that front, his record is reckless and dangerous. But on Taiwan, and yet, whether by accident, instinct, or calculation, this new Trump policy of retrenchment may be doing what no U.S. president before him has dared: lowering the risk of war in the Taiwan Strait. By pulling back to the second island chain, easing Beijing's anxiety, and cooling Taipei's independence momentum, this strategy points not toward conflict, but toward durable peace. This escape from the modern-day Thucydides Trap between America and China is a real grand strategic achievement. The irony of Nobel Trump. So here's the irony. The man I believe is dangerous for American democracy may, at the same time, be laying the groundwork for genuine stability in East Asia. And if avoiding a catastrophic war between the US and China is the outcome, then, whether by design or by accident, that would be a true achievement worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize. 9. Final. If this gave you something to think about, hit like and subscribe. And drop a comment. Do you support the new retrenchment of U.S. military abroad, and do you think Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize if he maintains the peace in the Taiwan Strait? See you next time on Twin Peaks Bridge Reflection.